Good morning, everyone, and happy spring. Thank you for joining us for our next episode on Workforce Rewired, where we're sparking conversations around humans and technology at work. And this week's topic is a particularly interesting one for me because we know when we have people who run our businesses, we're challenged with keeping culture and creating accountability. And now, with the rise of AI and technology, we're trying to do that in a tech enabled environment. So, this week's podcast is with our special guest, Henry Batten, who is the president of Concrete Supply Company. And we're going to be talking today about how do you maintain accountability in a tech enabled environment. So, Henry, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Always great to see you, and thanks for your support of Catapult as always. Henry, you and I have been on a number of panels together and talked about culture and accountability. And you've given some great examples of the way that you're doing this at Concrete Supply. And so I'd love to just kind of start with, at your organization, what are some of the examples of how you guys are maintaining accountability in this tech-enabled environment that we're living in?
Well, it's very interesting for us. We kind of do a couple of things. We do manufacturing and we do transportation, and we have um, AI technology in both segments of our business or aspects of the business. Um, and the the one thing when this started, I'll date myself a little bit. It's probably 10 years ago. We started putting cameras in the cabs of our trucks. And the biggest fear that I had with the camera was not necessarily, somebody had an accident and it really didn't change necessarily the outcome, although some did, but not generally speaking did the outcome change. But I didn't want it to be this premise that it was just Big Brother watching you, and
Mm.
you got the sword of Damocles over your head every time you're driving down the road because we have a camera that was facing the driver as well as facing outward, and I made the comment to our employees. I said, well, this isn't intended to be a gotcha. It's intended to improve behaviors, because right now we're having outcomes, but we really can't identify the very specific behaviors that created the outcome. And in order for us to improve, we have to be able to do that. And and it took off in a sense that there were a lot of other external factors that we weren't contemplating at the time. For example, lower insurance or um, reduced injuries or things like that. We were really trying to just focus on the concept of keeping the operator of the vehicle in a safe condition. And we had a great safety program, which was a testament to our employees. Um, but it even got better because we in used the technology, and we, we're not in a situation where we're looking to fire somebody. I've always said that that's not my focus. My hope was that we would develop the feedback and the capability to improve their behaviors while they're out on the road, or as a can't manufacturing place, improve the quality or the output. And so that
Yeah,
was
I think that's a really interesting point that you make because I know, culture is really important to you at
yeah,
Concrete Supply.
yeah.
And, people I think are afraid of technology for the punitive
Oh yeah.
implications that it
And
has.
that's the way it was originally received. And so and that caught me off guard, to be frank. I was not expecting our team to think of it in those terms because we had such a successful safety program. And I tell in my industry, I'll speak negatively about it a little bit. Our industry has a horrible safety record, in my opinion. Now, you know, it's better than other industries, obviously, but I said to my peers that I'm going to stop benchmarking against our industry. I'm going to benchmark against the best who operate trucks on the road, and it might be a JB Hunt or, somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, they questioned me, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, because we're in the top 1% of our industry, but we're not in the top 1% of all operators of vehicles
Mm-hmm.
and these large fleets and all this. And I said, we need to be in that category. And so I removed, in one sense, the benchmarking against our peers, but we still do that. But we're now focused on what we deem world-class safety performance, and it includes people that aren't in our industry but that do operate heavy equipment or heavy trucks, and that's been our motivation really for the last 10 years. When I came to the conclusion that our industry wasn't very good, I was great at being the top 1%, but 1% of a poor performing industry is still kind of poor in my mind.
It's interesting. I love the fact that you're pushing the benchmark higher for
Yeah.
your company and the industry. You mentioned it a little bit when you started talking about the cameras in the cabs and looking at it. Do your employees get the opportunity to see that technology and incorporate it into their professional development and kind of
So yeah,
self-correct?
so it's been an evolution. When they first got it, the way it worked was we would get these snippets of, 8 seconds of a
Hmm.
video, and we were supposed to coach the employee. And that's how we started. And we did that. And for the most part, the employees were trying to do the right thing and learn. And I said that because as we were growing, obviously the number of instances could grow because we had more people. Um, but I said, we spend an enormous energy on providing feedback, but it's 3 days or 4 days after the event happened.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I said, we need the technology and artificial intelligence essentially to tell us as we're operating and as it's occurring. So to give you an example, somebody that may not come to a complete stop at a stop sign and then rolls to the right, that would be an alert. And
Hmm.
but now what happens is rather than you getting that coaching session in 3 days, once we've assembled the data, you get it immediately when that happens, and it'll
Wow.
tell you, hey, you just ran through a stop sign, or or you're unbelted if you don't have your seatbelt on,
Wow.
or if you're distracted, it'll say, like somebody, it's illegal to look at your phone or use a phone in our for those heavy trucks. And so it'll tell you you're distracted, put your phone down.
Yep.
And so it gives them immediate, but it also gives us that immediate feedback back as well. And we can develop. So the next evolution of this is that driver, that professional driver at the end of the day is going to get a safety scorecard when he completes
Mhm.
his day and he signs out of his truck. He'll get a safety performance scorecard,
Wow.
and then we're trying to tie incentives to that upper tier performance that we're seeking. And I'm very excited about that because it clearly is going to give immediate feedback, and then we can reward that performance. Um, and
Hmm.
I mean, I want us to be as safe as possible, and we're not going to forego safety. I've said this at meetings with our internal employees all the time, is that I'd rather you shut the plant down and stop us than to
Hmm.
say, well, we'll worry about that at the end of the day. If it's a
Yeah.
safety issue, deal with it now and let's
Yeah.
solve it.
Boy, and you think about, the application of this kind of technology to so many industries,
Mhm.
right? To give people real-time feedback in the moment,
Yeah.
while so it allows them to course correct and learn. There's nothing more powerful than, being taught in the moment. And what a great example of how you've embraced technology, one to help your safety and your outcomes as a business and lower insurance, as you said, but also to build that performance culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly to reward it, because
Yeah.
that those are the behaviors we want. We need to be customer focused. I keep saying we need to be the Chick-fil-A of the concrete industry. Uh,
Yeah.
it's our pleasure to serve you, but uh, I'd rather you be the safest Chick-fil-A person,
Yeah.
not the most productive. I very much make that distinction. I'm not terribly motivated by, are we the highest and most productive output business? And the answer is no, but I believe it's not because we're not productive. It's because we're going to do things safely. And another
Hmm.
example is, if we're going to perform maintenance on a plant or something, we don't just jump out there and climb on the plant. You got to go through a job safety analysis, and you identify all the tasks that you have to accomplish, and then both parties, because you always have to have two now, both parties have to sign off on it, that I understand what I'm about to do. I'm going to climb up. I'm going to be at elevated heights. I've got my harness on. I'm going to be tied off, all of those things. But they stop, takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and understand what the task is you have to accomplish. And because we were having people that would just, the old adage, I've seen
Hmm.
people try to charge hell with the bucket of ice water, put the fire out, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
they're trying because they think they're doing the right thing, but they end up, cutting their hand or getting
Right.
nicked or
Right.
something. And I've always said we cannot operate like that. I'd rather you take the time to stop and let's perform this analysis so that we know what we're about to do. Um,
And it sounds like that ties directly into your organizational core values, right?
yeah.
Your core values of safety and things. When you're making some of these decisions about like the new technology, the cameras, and making that decision to have it in the cab, looking out, looking in, um, is that a employee recommendation? Is it leadership? Is it your vision? Like, how do you start to assess all the technology tools that you could possibly use and tie them directly to, meaningful metrics for your organization, whether that's your core values, your mission, your, policies, whatever?
Um, well, I've never treated safety and safety investment with a particular ROI financial metric involved. It was always under the guise of, is this the right thing to do? Is it the best options for us to maintain a safe workforce? And is it the best option for us to keep the public around us safe? And
Hmm.
so um, that's always been the sort of the motivation. So I'll give you an example of what takes place. So let's say we have a safety incident, and in this particular incident, so whenever there's a safety incident, there's a team. We get on a phone call, and the employee who had the incident has to explain the incident. Now, literally nobody's been fired because they have to explain how they had the
Right.
incident. But we had literally on a call with like five different incidences that happened over a course of a month. Two happened with somebody getting debris in their eye, even though they were wearing protective lenses. And one was a person laying in a loader's a front end loader. We use it to feed materials into one of our batch plants, but he was laying on the floorboard working above him, and he had the protective eye protection on, but it fell a little bit and it didn't encompass. And so there was, some sort of, I don't know, paint chip or something, debris fell, got into his eye. And then literally two two incidences later in the same call that we had, same scheduled call time period, somebody was walking on the yard and spraying, using water to spray off their truck to clean it, and a droplet came under their hard hat, but over their eye protection. So they're looking up literally like this. And I said, we clearly have the wrong eye protection. Now we got the OSHA approved eye protection, but it wasn't necessarily our environment approved. And so we went out and investigated and found, three things so that it encloses your eye so that water or debris, however you're looking, it stays with you. And that was a safety initiative that came out of, we're looking at
Mhm.
causation. How do we, we're wearing the correct PPE. How do we
Mhm.
prevent this from happening? And so now, we've switched our eye protection out. Another example was where our hard hats would fall over because they would just rest on your head. But if you bent over, they would fall off. We literally now have hard hats that are like a bicycle helmet. And we got a lot of grief from employees initially, but I said, my comment to him was, look, I get you don't like the way it looks per se, but it's intended to be a safety device. And
Yeah.
what I don't want to have happen is what we were addressing, where somebody bent over and then stood up and hit their head and ended up, having a cut that had to be sutured because their hard hat fell off.
Yeah.
And
It
then some
sounds to
people,
me like you should probably start a triathlon thing here because it sounds to me like you got a scuba mask and you
oh
got like a
yeah.
bicycle
Well,
helmet.
we do have now you can have different choices. They're not, you don't have like these skin tight things but
Yeah,
now like we do have visors that extend out over the hard hats and we do have a lot of different choices, but it
that's
was
fun.
clearly, you know, it- what we had was inadequate because it didn't prevent what it was intended to prevent.
Yeah. And how do you translate that into technology decisions? Who's making the technology decisions to say, let's put a camera inside a truck or let's create this new automation? How do you
Um,
balance that?
well, we once a year we review, I mean we're going through our safety performance monthly, but there is a period in which we kind of review back and say, all right, are there things that we could do differently? And should we consider doing these differently? And originally, when the camera thing came out, it had been out for some period of time. It wasn't as efficient as it is today, but it had been out. And we were investigating it, but we weren't really comfortable with the quality of the technology, the quality of the recording, and the benefits that we could otherwise derive from it. And so, for a number of years, we tried an alternative, which was, you know, just sort of after the fact of an accident, trying to do all the causation analysis and then sitting down with our groups. And what transpired was we were sitting down with people that went 20 years and never had an accident. And we were forcing them into this sort of behavioral assessment and discussion. And a couple of them said to me, why aren't you just getting the ones that are having the accidents? Why don't
Mm,
you just focus on that? And I came back and I said, well, all right, they're right. Number one, we're forcing them into these conversations. But number two, we're really not moving the needle with our approach. We're improving, but it's very slight improvement. And and that's where I said, I think let's revisit technology. And is there a way with these, newer camera systems? I mean, the Ring doorbells and all those things were coming
mm,
out.
mm,
And so we did. And we did find a couple of vendors. We liked one. Um, and then when they couldn't evolve as fast as we needed, we started looking at alternative vendors because once we started, then it was all right. Instead of the 3-day coaching, I want it to be immediate. Who can we find to make this improvement go faster? And that's where we got to where we are today. And then even then, we've pushed that vendor to be, I mean, and they were, I mean, it's Samsara, so they were pretty much world class to begin with, but we've pushed them well beyond what they originally thought conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped them with their other ready mix customers and dump truck customers, and and we get a lot of feedback that you guys are very forward thinking, thought provoking in how we use the technology. Um, and I didn't want it cumbersome. Like there's so much in a cab of a truck now. I didn't want this to be, very cumbersome. Because the original cameras were pretty big. I mean, they were
Yeah.
almost like twice as big as a cell phone, almost like a tablet.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you
Right.
have to train employees or managers on the technology?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We spent the first go around, we spent a lot of time and energy. The second go around, they were pretty much accustomed to it, but it shrank. The technology got smaller, and we were able to put it in. What I didn't want, it was like, all right, we're going to block out a part of the windshield with
Right.
this tablet thing,
Right.
and we needed to stop that
Yeah.
because I didn't want to impact their visibility, but I also wanted it to have immediate feedback, and so we were able to get smaller technology, faster technology, um, and cameras that had both audio and video capabilities so that they could the AI voice could speak to them directly. And
Well, I mean, I can't think of a better example of accountability, leveraging technology, and staying ahead of the curve in
it,
an industry that you would not typically expect.
no, I mean, we've been around back in the
Yeah.
Roman days, right? Concrete's been around forever, but yeah, it's interesting to see how it's evolving. And what's crazy for us is our evolution with it started purely on a safety basis, but it's moving into an operational component now, which was never the original intent. I mean, it's sort of, hey, we can do this now because we
Mhm.
have this technology, and it's been very beneficial from that. And I'm happy that we weren't necessarily motivated by, hey, let's improve some productivity metric or something like this, or the first priority was let's be safer, let our employees go home, at the end of the day because they were safe and they were, well cared for.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't think of a better way. I was thinking of asking you a question to kind of wrap this segment as we're about at our time now. And I think you just did that for me, right? Which was, if I can summarize what you said, is, choose technology for the right reasons, tie
Yeah.
it to your company values, and, the operational productivity will come.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm convinced we're better as an organization. We may be more productive, I guess, as an organization, but I know we're safer as an organization. And and for us, that's our first priority. Every discussion we ever have begins with safety. Um, we don't cover financials, and that's the third or fourth topic.
Yeah.
We,
Yeah.
we start
That's
with
great.
safety. Yeah, yeah,
That's awesome. Henry Batten, president of Concrete Supply Company, has been my guest today on maintaining accountability in a tech-enabled environment. Lots of great nuggets, words of wisdom here for our listeners on Workforce Rewired.